Welcome to Resilience Plus Rise, the podcast where resilience is not just a concept, but it's a lived experience. I'm your host, Scaria, a resilience coach, an ultramarathoner, and a relentless believer in the human spirit's ability to rise. This podcast is a companion to my book, Resilience Plus Rise 26.2 Transformative Miles to Unleash Your Marathon of Life Mindset. Each episode is a raw, unfiltered dive into the stories of those who have faced life's hardest battles and emerged stronger. Today's honored guest. Yes, I would say when I said about human spirit's ability to rise, she's a epitome of that. Beth McDonough, sorry, how do I pronounce your last name?
McDonough.
McDonough, thank you.
You're welcome.
Is an extraordinary messenger. By what do I mean by that? When you look at what she has gone through, Beth is a former TV crime reporter from one of US's top markets. For years, she was a voice of breaking major stories, whether it was for government scandals, kidnapping cases, high-profile murders, you name it. That adrenaline, that chaos we see at times in the movies or TV shows, she was living through it. Hard news reporting. But behind it, there was another Beth who had a drinking problem.
Mm-hmm.
She directly mentioned, yes, she was a functioning alcoholic until it caught up with her 2 times. DUI, drinking under influence. What she saw was absolutely a career collapsing and hitting personal rock bottom.
Mm-hmm.
Today, Beth, looking back, she has encompassed it in a book called A Standby, wherein she talks about her personal battles with her demons, whether it is alcoholism or her own self-image that she was fighting against. Before I can head more to it, let's directly jump and talk to Beth. Beth, welcome to Resilience Plus Rise, the podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. This will be fun, and I hope inspirational.
Yes, I'm sure it is. So, Beth, take us through the journey before things went haywire.
That's a nice way of putting it. I appreciate that. Well, I got into TV news right out of college. I always wanted to be a newscaster ever since I was a little girl. We had an anchor at a local news station come into our classroom when I was young in junior high. And she was talking about her career and civics and current events. And she was just polished and beautiful and smart and could connect with people. And she knew so much. And I thought, you know what? When I grow up, that's what I want to do. So right after I got out of college and I studied communications, I immediately started in little bitty starter markets, as a cub reporter. And so I worked in Joplin, Missouri, Tyler, Texas, Lubbock, Texas. Then my first kind of big job, if you will, was in Houston, Texas. And I worked for the NBC there. And I was an anchor there as well for many years. But I loved being in a reporter, being out on the street, in the field, covering mass events, kind of being at the intersection of adrenaline and chaos. And as an anchor, you're inside the TV station more. And I really wanted to get back out in the street, if you will, because I'd always been a reporter and I missed the rush of it all and breaking stories. And so then I got a job in Philadelphia. And I worked for a couple of TV stations there at one time or another, the NBC, and the CBS, and I worked there for 7 years. And while I was working there, that's when 9/11 happened. And I was actually on air waiting to do a live report, and we saw the first plane hit. And then when my crew and I saw the second plane hit, and I was working for NBC at the time, then we knew the world as we knew it was changing. And so I went up to New York for a little bit to cover post 9/11 stuff and help out the NBC station there in New York. And then I came back to Philadelphia for a little bit, and a whole bunch of things kind of happened in very rapid succession, which is not an excuse. It's just an explanation of life stressors that I found out my contract wasn't being renewed at my TV station because NBC was being bought out by Comcast. And so they bring in their own people, right? So my contract's not being renewed. I was going through a divorce, which I wanted, but still, it's a thing. And very quickly after that, my mother died very unexpectedly. And while she was in the hospital and dying, my dad also had to have a quadruple bypass. And I'm kind of the caretaker in the family, so I had to leave my job and go to Oklahoma and handle my mom's funeral and kind of nurse my dad back to health. So I never really had time for me to just sit there and grieve because, being a reporter and also in the family, my role was the caretaker, take care of things, take care of my father, handle my mom's funeral, take care of the family, help everyone else grieve. And when I went back I at that time had a job in Minnesota working for Fox News, KMSP. I came back to work and I just started that job. And I never really let myself mourn. I kind of segued back into the hard charging reporter, keep myself busy, break stories, a distraction for my head, if you will, from all the grief. But over time, that grief really started to seep into my bones. And I cover disasters for a living, murder, death, destruction, mayhem. They used to joke in the newsroom, if you see Beth, there must be death.
Whoa.
um, right. That one took me a little bit to, find the levity in it. Because I thought, gosh, is that the case? And it is, but I see some of the struggles that people go through differently. I've always been enamored by survivors and what it takes for people to get through things, get through the worst things in their life. If they survive it, what does that look like on the other side? What can they share with us? It's that human element of survival. And so I just, jump back into news reporting full time. And slowly but surely, I'd been a party girl before. And slowly but surely, my drinking definitely escalated from just being a party level after work on the weekends to more often. And if you think about news people, I always work the night shift usually. So I get off at 11 or midnight at night, after the late news. What's open then? Bars. And so what do we news people do? We go to bars afterwards, not every night, but some. And, in the hopes that you decompress a little bit. You kind of vent with your colleagues and other friends in the industry. And so we would do that at night, sometimes after the news. And the number of nights we would do that started to escalate. And I would notice that I couldn't put my drink down, but everybody else could. But I just simply couldn't. If I saw alcohol there, I'm like, gosh, there's still wine in my glass. I've got to drink it. I can't waste it. And my drinking definitely increased. And it was shortly after the 35W bridge collapse in Minneapolis. People might remember that back in 2007. It was rush hour in the evening and everyone was driving home from work, crossing a major bridge in the Twin Cities, like a bridge you'd see in any other major city. At 6 p.m. in the evening when people are going home from work, and it just fell down into the Mississippi River. And so my crew and I, of course, rushed to the scene, and, we're watching people being pulled out of their vehicles, stuck in the water, and, children injured, and first responders jumping into action. And I only tell you that because I think I worked maybe 24 hours straight at that time, covering that until the rescue missions became recovery missions. And then a few days later, lo and behold, some colleagues and I go out and have drinks. And I knew I was starting to get drunk, and I thought I better hurry up and get home. And on my way home, I slammed into a panel of mailboxes right in front of my house, which I do not remember to this day. And a short time after that, police arrived at my home, and that was my first DUI.
So let's jump forward. The second DUI came in,
Yes,
and then your face gets posted on
everywhere,
everywhere.
everywhere.
What was going on through your mind?
Whew. Well, after I got the first DUI, my boss at Fox News offered me a lifeline. He said, "Do you have a problem? Do you need help? We'll get you help. We will support you." Shame and stigma being what it is, it's one thing to cover someone else's shame. It's another thing to be the shame and see yourself in the mirror. And the shame and the fear of being labeled an alcoholic, I just couldn't embrace at that time. The denial and the shame, I was like, no, this is a one-off. I will get on top of this. I'll get in control of this. I'm a strong person. You have to be to be a reporter and, see the things that I do day in and day out. And so I promised him this is a one-off. It will never happen again. And he said, well, I hope not. If it does, you will be fired. Because Fox News has a zero tolerance policy. So if you violate any of their policies, and we also have a morality clause in our contract, he said, you'll be gone. So when I got the second one, and it was actually 16 years ago this month that I got the second DUI, I again had been out with coworkers and drove home like an idiot. I lived a few miles away from where we were. Why I didn't take a cab or an Uber, who knows? But that's kind of the alcoholic, stinking thinking.
Yeah.
And I hit someone on the highway at 80 miles an hour. He wasn't hurt. The driver wasn't hurt. His car was damaged, and he did sue me. But again, when I got home, the police were waiting on my front doorstep. And I'm a blackout drinker. So some of what I share with you is what I pieced together with police reports, my attorney, and, the court hearing, all of that. And so I blacked out for about 36 hours, and I was in jail that whole time. And when I came to, and this is how my book starts, it's not a soft start. I take people right into the jail cell with me because you hear people get DUIs and we're like, oh, that seems awful. And it is, but we don't know about the human behind the headline. So the book starts out where everyone wakes up with me in jail in my orange jumpsuit on a cot, watching other women in the drunk tank, watching this big TV screen in the holding cell. And the news anchors were talking about me and my mugshot, the one you see here behind me. My mugshot popped up.
It's a little grayed out. I cannot see it, but
Okay. Well, my mugshot popped up. And that's how I kind of came to and seeing my mugshot up on this big wall of a TV and all the women talking about me. And of course, I was horrified. And I knew right then, that my life as I knew it was over, very over. There was no mistaking if I was going to be fired. And, there's almost, you can't even think damage control because I knew how bad this was going to be. Once I saw it on the news and my mugshot and the women talking about it. And when the deputies were escorting me out of jail, my attorney wouldn't pick me up over the weekend. He wanted me to stay a few extra days because I didn't learn my lesson the first time. So with me, the lessons were just everywhere I turned, and so how can you almost not see that you have to change your life at some point? When I was being let out of the jail then, and I asked the deputy, I said, how bad is it out there? And I knew her. I knew most all of the officers and deputies and prosecutors because I'd been a crime reporter for 15 years. And she said, oh, all the newsies are here. And I'm like, okay. And she goes, you even have Inside Edition. And I'm like, oh, God. This is, and I said, any chance you're going to let me go out the back door? And she said, nope, because I know there's a back door where they let some people out. But again, there's the lesson for me. And so when I did get out of the jail and my attorney parked 10 blocks away in the dead of a Minnesota winter. So I would have to do the walk of shame in front of all the cameras and reporters. And mind you, getting a walk of shame, we call it the perp walk. It's kind of a little badge of honor. We all, love to get the good walk of someone. And on this day, I'm the walk. And, that was pretty hard to take. And I finally got in the vehicle with my attorney, and he said, you have a problem. You have to do something about it. And in my head, I'm trying to damage control and this, that, and the other. And he's like, there is no damage control. And when he dropped me off at my house, Inside Edition was there, the newspapers, the radios, other TV people I've worked with for many, many years. And that was just really tough. That was a gut punch, because for years I had asked people a lot of hard questions, being a reporter,
Mm-hmm.
and now I had to answer them.
Wow. So how was that period wherein you had the stark realization where you are and life that changed with an accident?
Yes. It was, the best word I can use is excruciating. It was emotionally excruciating. I heard from my boss. He said, come to the TV station. You have some paperwork to sign. And I knew it was over. And, I had a pretty good life. It wasn't a perfect life, but, the bills got paid, and I got a paycheck every 2 weeks. It was a good job. I loved it. And I really enjoyed my boss. And the hard thing, there's so many hard things about this. But in Minnesota, if you get more than one DUI in 10 years, you lose your license for a year. And then authorities can also seize your car and sell it at auction, which they did. And just a couple of weeks before that, I'd paid off my car. So I was like, oh, look at me adulting. I was so proud. It was like this, check that box in life. I'm adulting. I own my car now. And so when my boss said, come to the TV station, I'm like, I can't get there because they took my car. And so he sent me a taxi, and he was so disgusted. Sent me a taxi, and I got to the Fox TV station and immediately was taken into HR. None of my colleagues that I worked very closely with, they just couldn't even make eye contact with me because I brought some bad PR on them. They were all shocked and disheartened and deeply disappointed and mad at me. They were mad at me, which I understand. And so my boss said, I told you last year if it happened again that you'd be fired. And he said, it's a shame. You helped to put us on the map here, and you had a job for life. But as of today, you're no longer of use to us. And we kept the taxi, you can take it home, you can go to treatment, it's your call. But as of today, you're fired. And I was just like, oh, stabbed to my heart. And I remind myself often, Fox didn't do this to me. I did this to them. I put them in a really bad position, and he had no choice. But I also want to emphasize, there had been warning signs along the way, including my first DUI. And I just didn't want to be labeled an alcoholic because you're afraid you're going to lose everything. If people find out you have this demon, well, guess what? You're going to lose everything anyway. And what he did that day, firing me from the job I loved more than anything, that I sacrificed everything for, I chose my career over my marriage even. That day was my wake-up call. And at the time, it was a blessing in disguise. But that is what got my attention, was to take the thing from me that I love more than anything. And shortly then thereafter, I would go on to, we put my home on the market, but no one would buy my home because it was my home, because I was such damaged goods. So I knew my home would be foreclosed at some point. The guy I hit sued me. All of the fines, the attorney cost, everything, court costs in Minnesota are doubled after you have more than one DUI. So, I knew I was going to be broke at some point. And I lost, I would say, most of my friends, some family who just didn't understand that alcoholism is a disease and not a character fault. And that was pretty hard. And my dad, who's not with us anymore, we were very, very close, best friends. And that broke us. He just couldn't understand. And I think I broke his heart too. So that was very hard for both of us. And strangely, my therapist, when I was in treatment, and so I went to a 30-day treatment facility, which I recommend to anyone. And I understand why people have an aversion to going, because I did for a split second too. Like, who wants to go? That further solidifies you're an addict, right? But I have to tell you, it was the best thing on earth, going to treatment, 30 days inpatient, doing therapy every day with a counselor, doing group therapy with other people. And when you hear other women like yourself sharing their stories, you're like, oh yeah, I'm an alcoholic. The patterns are here.
So, Beth, before we can get into that part of the rehabilitation or the rise, I believe when life really pushes us onto the ground, as if there was a point wherein you mentioned the people that were closest to you just did not have guts even to look at your face.
Mm-mm.
The people who used to hold your hands when you were drinking around and having a good time, it was more than bear hugs. Like, yes, what was going through your mind? I mean, I don't want to get back to the past, but then what were going, like, that's what we humans think, is that we believe that there is a community who can support us and who can be with us. And even when the shit hits the fan, there will be
Mhm.
somebody who can help us to clean it up. So when suddenly you realize the life that you, as you mentioned, you had built up, the aura of people looking at you, because again, when we talk about NBC and Fox, it's not some local small news areas. This is world acclaimed channels. So what was going on through your mind? What was how was the how that I know there would be rage, anger, or it was just the sense of helplessness. What was going on?
I would say it was very defeating. It
Mhm.
was very defeating. I don't blame anyone, because they had to back up for themselves, because they didn't know who I was at that time. They didn't know who I was becoming either. So I understand that they kind of were backing up to see how this was going to play out
Mhm.
and what would happen with me if I would do the work, if I would pull through this, or if, the spiral was going to continue. So, it was defeating and deflating, honestly, just like, okay, well, you know what? This is self-imposed. I dropped the atomic bomb in my life, and it's going to be up to me to pick myself up and figure my way out of this situation and figure out how to deal with an illness. And, I've had cancer, and we've all had issues in our life. And, you know, yeah. And when people have heart attacks or they have heart disease or cancer, we don't kind of go, well, get over it, or, stop eating steak. So when people are like, why couldn't you stop drinking? Well, I'm a smart person, and everyone out here watching this, we're all smart people. If we could stop drinking on our own, we would, because, this side of it is not fun.
Mhm.
And you end up in jail and handcuffs and court fines, and your life certainly gets turned upside down. So if I could have stopped on my own, I would have. But I'm like, okay, Beth, well, the time has come. In your heart of hearts, you have a problem. And you got to figure out what your life is going to look like going forward, and how do you get there. And so the first step for me, it was treatment. It was, well, first I would say it was acknowledging that I did this. They didn't do
Mhm.
it to me. It's self-inflicted, because I believe accountability is everything. And I also believe that's the reason why I'm still sober to this day, because I let everyone know I don't drink. And the amount of support you get when you just announce that to the universe and the people in your surroundings, people will then support you and help, and make sure the wrong drink isn't put in front of you at a restaurant or whatever. So then after the accountability, it was going to treatment and doing the hard work there, where you meet with medical professionals every day and psychologists, and they do blood work on you. And then you kind of deconstruct your family history. And my mom and dad didn't drink. And so it just wasn't in our house. It just wasn't a thing. And it turns out, when speaking with other family members, that both of my grandparents had died of alcoholism. And my biological father, he abandoned us when I was little, so I never had a relationship with him. But he also was an alcoholic, a drug addict, and he had severe mental health issues. So he spent most of his life, from what I understand, on the street or in institutions. And then I have a sister who died of a drug addiction. So, I'm like, okay, Beth, well, you're hardwired. You don't have the luxury of being able to dabble, with a little bit of alcohol. And fortunately, pills and hard drugs weren't my thing. Thank goodness. Because I saw people struggle with that in treatment. And boy, it's a tough thing to overcome. So I'm like, okay, you're hardwired. You can't drink anymore. Those days are over. And then people used to say when we would go out after work or, to have fun on the weekend, that if I had one drink, that my personality would go from 0 to 100. And they're like, why? I'm like, I don't know. Maybe I have low tolerance, because they would have the same amount of drinks and be fine. Well, if you're also on an antidepressant, that magnifies the alcohol effect. But I learned from my therapist while still in treatment that women are at a unique disadvantage when it comes to drinking alcohol because we absorb 30% more alcohol than men do because our bodies have more fat on it, which we hate anyway. And we have less of an enzyme that breaks down alcohol. Well, men conversely have more water in your body and alcohol dissolves in water. And so you can see men and women have the same amount of drinks and women will be significantly more inebriated for longer as well than men, just because of our basic genders and our biological makeup. And I'm like, okay, Beth, well, you deal in facts every day and in truth and accuracy. And I'm like, all right, well, your family, you're hardwired to be an alcoholic, so you can't drink anymore. You're a woman and it's going to be magnified on you. And, all the evidence around you, people have told you always that the alcohol hits you hard. So based on those two things alone, I'm like, okay, I need to create a new life going forward that doesn't involve any alcohol, that doesn't involve any of that.
Fantastic. So, Beth, with your permission, this episode I will stop over here.
Okay.
And the next episode will be your rise back from the ashes.
Okay.
So I'll let me take this time to say thank you for your space and time.
You're welcome.
We will start the next episode soon. Thank you.
Okay. I'm ready for you.